Today, I want to talk about something that's also fun, but also very useful and helpful if it is greatness and transcendence that we are seeking. You see, we're now at the part of the Torah that talks about the redemption, the Exodus, the reclamation project of our people, a glorious nation that was brought to the depths, to the pits, to the absolute nadirs, a nation that was enslaved and oppressed and tormented and mistreated and marginalized in every possible way. But they're going to be redeemed. And they're going to be redeemed by a most unusual person with an unusual and curious backstory, a person who will become eventually the greatest who's ever lived, the humblest of men, the one that's going to bring us the Torah, who's going to shepherd the nation out of Egypt and lead the nation into the wilderness and steward the nation for 40 years. Of course, that's Moshe. And he has the most unusual backstory. His father is a Levite, his mother is a Levite, and they get married and they have a child, and the times are very rough because at the time of Moshe's birth, there was a rule, a decree, that all male babies must be cast into the water, must be chucked into the water, must be drowned in the water. And Moshe was born, and he was born a little bit ahead of schedule. Our sages tell us that he was born at 6 months as opposed to the typical 9 months. And therefore, there's a little bit of a buffer period between when Moshe was born and when the agents were sent looking for him. So he was able to stay with his family for 3 months, but at the end of 3 months, they had to make a decision. And the decision that they made is to take Moshe, put him in a little makeshift boat, and put him on the water. And he's on the water, and coincidentally, of course, there's no coincidence, there's a woman who's going to take a bath in the water. And that, of course, is daughter of Pharaoh. And she sees the box, and she's curious. And she takes the box, opens it, sees the baby, and is overcome with mercy. Even though she knows that this is an Israelite, she decides to adopt the baby. Now, you adopt a 3-month-old baby, you have to come up very quickly with a plan of how you're going to feed the baby. Because baby doesn't eat solid foods. And if the mom's not around, you don't really have many options. How are you going to feed the baby? So the verse tells us that Miriam, sister of Moshe, she suggested, I'll find you a wet nurse from the Israelites. I'll find you someone who's going to serve as a nurse, even though they're not actually the mom. Because a woman, when she has a baby, she's able to nurse a baby, but otherwise she's not able to. So it's a common thing before they had formula, artificial food, they would have women who would they would be wet, they're called wet nurses. They would nurse babies. And she takes the baby, gives the baby to the biological mother, and she nurses the baby until the baby's weaned, and the baby's returned to the adopted mother. And of course, that's the backstory of Moshe. Very unusual, very interesting. Moshe is raised as an Egyptian, as an adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter, as an adopted grandson of Pharaoh. And it's a great irony. It's a fascinating factoid that the Redeemer of Israel, who's going to extract Israel from the clutches of Pharaoh and is going to bring Pharaoh to his knees, he was actually raised by Pharaoh himself. And the point I want to focus on, just to get us started here, is the decision to go find a wet nurse from the Hebrews. The verse tells us, this is in chapter 2, verse 6. The sister of the baby, meaning Miriam, sister of Moshe, she tells the princess, should I go and should I summon a woman from the Hebrews to nurse your baby? And Rashi asks the question, wait a minute. Why is the sister suggesting to go find a wet nurse from the Hebrews? I'm sure there were wet nurses from the Egyptians. Why is the proposal to find a wet nurse from the Hebrews? So Rashi tells us something absolutely fascinating. Very, very interesting, and it raises a lot of questions. When Princess of Egypt adopted Moshe, she knew that she has to find a wet nurse. And she went to one wet nurse, and a second, and a third, and a fourth. Many, many, many potential candidates to nurse the baby, and the baby refused. The baby refused to nurse. Why? Why did Moshe refuse to nurse? Very interesting. Moshe is 3 months old. But Moshe, the baby, had some sort of foreknowledge of the fact that in the future, this mouth, Moshe's mouth, is going to communicate with Almighty God. And therefore, it's important to preserve and protect the sanctity of that mouth. And therefore, that mouth does not want to nurse from an impure source. The Egyptians, idolaters, the people who are enslaving the Jewish people. This is not a place that you want to draw your nourishment from. Your mouth must be pure. It must be untainted. It must be unsullied. And therefore, Moshe, as a 3-month-old baby, absolutely categorically refused to nurse from any one of the options presented to him. You imagine he would be hungry and would need food, but he made a decision at 3 months old, I hereby refuse to nurse from the Egyptian women. I will only nurse from a Hebrew. And therefore, Miriam, his sister, says to the princess, maybe the reason why he doesn't want to nurse is because he only wants to nurse from a Hebrew. Shall I go? Shall I fetch a Hebrew wet nurse and they will nurse the baby? And indeed, that's what happened. Miriam goes and she fetches her own mother, and Moshe's own biological mother. And Princess of Egypt, Pharaoh's daughter, actually hires Yocheved, mother of Moshe, to nurse her adopted baby. And the verse tells us that when the princess of Egypt proposed, obviously not knowing that this is the actual mother, but proposed that this woman nurses the baby, she offered to pay. I'll pay you. And the Talmud tells us, this is an amazing thing. Yocheved would have loved nothing more than to nurse her own baby. And not only did she do it, she got the opportunity, the privilege, she merited to do it, she was also paid to do it. That's a sign the Almighty is kind of winking at you, and he's saying, I got you back, I'm with you in this. I'll make sure not only you do what you want to do, but you'll get paid for it as a side benefit. So Moshe grows up, and for the duration of his nursing, meaning until he was weaned from nursing, he was actually raised by his own biological mother, as if she was acting on behalf of the adopted mother of the princess of Egypt. Once Moshe grew up, he was weaned, she gave her son, Moshe, back to the adopted mother, back to the daughter of Pharaoh, and she named him Moshe, and thenceforth Moshe grew up in the palace. But this idea that Moshe refused to nurse from the impure sources, it's a really fascinating idea. And I think the first question is, Moshe was 3 months old. How did he know? How did he have that foreknowledge that he's destined to be a prophet and to speak with God? And it raises also a philosophical problem. Did Moshe have free will? Could he have maybe opted out? Was already baked in at the age of 3 months? He was already destined to be a prophet? Furthermore, is breast milk kosher? Does it matter who the mother is? It's kosher. The food is kosher. So why is Moshe saying, I'm not willing to eat it if it comes from an impure source? But it is fascinating that we find a law in the halachic literature. The law tells us that suppose, for whatever reason, the biological mother cannot nurse the baby. She doesn't have milk, or she maybe is not around. What do you do? There's only a woman, she's maybe an idolater, she's an Egyptian, and she's a hired hand to nurse the baby. Can you take a Jewish child and give him to the non-Jewish woman to nurse them? So the law states, Chalav Mitzris, the milk of an Egyptian, is exactly like the milk of an Israelite. It's the same thing, perfectly kosher. Nevertheless, if you have another option, if there's maybe another person who could also do it, you have two women who they're both candidates to nurse the baby, it's preferable to come from a holy source. Because this woman, she's an idolater. And the idolatry, it enters her. And it permeates every part of her existence. And her milk, it's tainted. It's tainted with the venom of the idolatry. And even though it's perfectly healthy and it's perfectly kosher, nevertheless, the child that nurses from the idolater, from the Egyptian, will have a little bit of a spiritual damage done to them. It will clog up their spiritual pathways. And it will install within them bad character. Why? Because what you eat becomes part of you, and what you do becomes part of you. A woman does idolatry, that becomes part of her. And when she feeds her child, that becomes part of the child as well. There was a line from Menachem Begin. Menachem Begin was the prime minister of Israel. And he grew up in Poland. And he used to say that the Poles, they're anti-Semitic. And he added, they drink it in their mother's milk. That's what he said. They drink it in their mother's milk. That's what Menachem Begin said about the Poles. This is an idea that we see over here in the literature, in the halachic literature, that when a woman, she has a certain value system, that gets passed on to her child in the milk. And therefore, if you have two options, both of them are kosher, but it's way preferable to find a holy source, because otherwise the Egyptian milk is going to corrode the heart and the spiritual sensitivity and acuity of the child that she nurses. Now, what's interesting is that our sages tell us that, how do we know this idea? Where do we find this idea that it's preferable to use the milk that comes from a holy and elevated source? The source of the idea is actually Moshe himself. Moshe is like teaching us an insight. He's only 3 months old, but he's already teaching us that if you want to make sure that you're going to have prophecy and you don't want to taint your mouth, you don't want to imbibe any of those harmful elements, make sure that everything that you consume is holy. Because if you consume certain things, it may clog up your spiritual pathways. Like Rashi tells us, Moshe knew that his mouth was going to speak to God. And therefore, he didn't want to have that same mouth tainted and corrupted with the milk that comes from the Egyptian, that comes from the idolater. And here's the point that I want to address. And this is going to be the launch pad for the idea I want to share with y'all today. Moshe is one of a kind. Moshe is the only person that had the highest level of prophecy. He's the only person that ascended to heaven, negotiated with the angels, extracted the Torah, brought it to us. He's the only person who's the humblest of men. He's the only person who has the highest level of prophecy, ba'aspaklaria me'ira, in the most clear way. Every other prophet was given a vision at night when they were asleep, and they had to interpret it. Moshe was by day, and he was awake. And it was words. Zeh hadavar, the Talmud tells us. Moshe is the only prophet that used the words Zeh hadavar. This is the word of God. All the other prophecies, there was a little bit of interpretation done by the prophet themselves. The prophet themselves would have to understand what the message is, because the message was not verbal. It was conceptual. And God revealed the concept to them, and they would have to put it in their own words. They would have to articulate what the message was. Moshe is the only prophet that says this is the literal word of God. He's just a funnel. He's not interpreting on his own the message, the concept. Every other prophet can prepare for prophecy, but cannot summon it. Moshe could summon prophecy. He's the only one. So if he has an extra fastidiousness to make sure that his mouth does not get tainted, to make sure it doesn't absorb and imbibe something that's inappropriate, well, that makes sense. He's Moshe after all. He's going to be the one who speaks to God face to face, directly, without any separation. There's no angels intermediating. This is Moshe, the greatest of the prophets, the father of all prophets. When the halakhic literature tells us that today, in 2026, if you have a child, you need a nurse, you find someone that's a holy source, not an idolater, not an Egyptian. How is that in any way comparable to Moshe? Moshe is one of one. Moshe is one of a kind. How do we expand? How do we transfer this sensitivity that Moshe had to every single child? And our Hasidus tell us a very powerful idea. When you have a child, this child has unlimited potential. The Rambam tells us every single human, he doesn't even say Jew, every human can be as great as Moshe. Now that's an outrageous statement because Moshe is one of one. Moshe is the only person who did all those things, who had all those high levels. What the Rambam is telling us is that every person, even though in absolute levels of greatness, cannot be as great as Moshe, but in relative levels of greatness, every person can be as great as Moshe. And it's possible that every child is a potential great person that changes the entire course of human history. When you have a child, there's no reason why this child cannot be the person who completely transforms the trajectory of all of humanity. And therefore, what Hasidus is telling us is that even though there's only one Moshe, but when you have a child, and you're raising this child, you have to make sure that you do your part to create the environment that if this child chooses to achieve meteoric greatness, you will present the environment for that to flourish. You will do whatever you can to make sure that you will cultivate that pursuit of greatness. Who are the ones that become great? So we may think, well, there's certain people who are predisposed to it. The Rambam tells us otherwise. Every single person, not even every Jew, every person can be as great as Moshe, can actualize the potential 100% and accomplish great things. So what determines the success and or failure of someone's pursuit of greatness? It's up to them. They made the choice. Every child is a potential Moshe, and therefore every child must be treated as a potential Moshe. We don't know which ones will achieve superstardom. We don't know which child will be the true standout. And therefore, we have to treat every child as if they're going to be the Moshe of this generation. This to me is a very, very novel insight, a very powerful insight, a very demanding insight. Every single child can become the standout, the outstanding, exceptional person of their generation. And therefore, how can you take the child and give him to the Egyptian idolatrous wet nurse? It doesn't fit with where they're destined to go, where they're headed to. That's the first day I want to share in the parsha. Now, Moshe, his story takes some interesting twists and turns. He grows up and he goes out to inspect the well-being of his brethren, and he sees the Egyptian, and the Egyptian's striking the Hebrew, and he looks right and looks left, and he sees that there's no man, and he strikes the Egyptian, he slays the Egyptian, he buries him in the sand, and the next day he sees two Hebrew men fighting, and he intervenes, and he tells the wicked one, "Why are you striking your fellow?" And the other person says, the Hebrew says, "Are you in charge of us? You're the minister over us? Are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" Pharaoh finds out what happened. Moshe killed an Egyptian officer, and Moshe is condemned. And they try to execute him, and he flees. And that in itself is a dramatic story. In one version of the Midrash, Moshe's neck became like marble. So they tried to kill him with a sword, and the sword broke. In another Midrashic account, the executioners became mute and deaf, and Moshe escaped. Regardless, Moshe escaped. And he goes to Midian, and he marries the daughter of Jethro, and he has a son Gershom, and he's a shepherd, and he sees the burning bush, and he has his first prophecy. And Moshe is told, go down to Egypt. Simple instructions. Go down to Egypt. Go save the Jewish people yourself. And of course, Moshe is taken back by that. And we read a very long dialogue, chapters 3 and half of chapter 4, about Moshe saying, no, I can't do it for this reason, for that reason, for the other reason. All these objections and problems that Moshe has with the mission laid before him. And the Torah tells us very detailed descriptions of the narrative of the dialogue. The verse tells us that Moshe begins his series of objections. Mi anochi, who am I? I'm not worthy of this. Someone who's going to go to speak to Pharaoh, who's going to start negotiating with kings, they have to be worthy of it. I'm not worthy. Moshe deemed himself unworthy. And God responds to that objection. God says, who are you? This is not you. We're not talking about you, Moshe. Who am I that I'm going to go speak to Pharaoh? We're not talking about you, Moshe. This is not you acting. This is me. I will be with you. You're just the implement, the tool of God. That was Moshe's first objection, God's response. But then Moshe said further, what about the nation of Israel? Let's say I'm worthy. Fine, I accept that. I'm worthy to go extract the nation. But what about the nation themselves? To have them extracted from Egypt, that's a great miracle. To be worthy of a miracle, you have to be meritorious. The nation is not meritorious. So why are they worthy to have a miracle like this done for them? Moshe is saying, okay, I accept the first point. It's not me, it's you. I'm just the implement. Let's say I am worthy. But there's a nation of Israel, the people, and Moshe deems them unworthy of such a miracle. Exodus tell us that in Egypt, the nation became very sinful. They adopted the idolatrous practices of their neighbors, of their hosts. In fact, we're told that there was very little that separated the average Israelite from the average Egyptian. They became assimilated, they became acculturated. They lost their special standing. They forgot who they are. They veered off the path of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The only connection between them and their forebears was that they maintained Hebrew names and Hebrew language, and they still had Hebrew garments, meaning that they were only culturally connected to their heritage. But in their practice, in their worldview, in their behavior, in their values, they were Egyptian. This is not a nation worthy of such a miracle. So Moshe tells God, fine, I'll go. I can represent you, sure. But the nation's not worthy. And what does God say to that objection? It's very interesting. Chapter 6, verse 12. This is the sign that I sent you. This is our response. This is the sign that I sent you. When the nation leaves Egypt, you will serve God on this mountain. Moshe is asking a question. His question is, why is the nation of Israel worthy of such a miracle? And that's a very legitimate question, because the nation does not seem to be worthy at all for such a miracle. They're not worthy of having the Exodus, God pulling up people from amidst the people with great wonders and a strong hand and all these miracles and signs and wonders and plagues. They're not worthy. What does God say? The sign that I sent you is that when you leave Egypt, you will serve God on this mountain. What merit does Israel have to leave Egypt? They will get the Torah 3 months after they leave. Now, whenever you have an answer, the answer has to answer the question. The verse is very perplexing. There's a question. Moshe is saying a question. By what grounds is the nation worthy of the Exodus? Where's the merit? They're not worthy of having such a miracle. And God responds, in 3 months after the Exodus, they will serve God on this mountain. They will receive the Torah. The mountain that the burning bush happened was actually Mount Sinai, the verse tells us. How does that answer the question? It's a perplexing idea. Moshe is saying they're not worthy, and not saying something which is totally unrelated, a non sequitur. When they leave, they'll serve God on the mountain. Look at the Torah, Mount Sinai, 3 months after the Exodus. What, pray tell, does that have to do with Moshe's question? How does that answer the question? They're not worthy, so tell me they are worthy. That makes sense. They're not worthy, but maybe tell me they don't need to be worthy. These are all answers to the questions. Moshe has an assumption. You have to be worthy of a miracle. And God could respond, well, maybe you don't have to be worthy of a miracle. I accept that. God could also respond, they are worthy. That made sense to me as well. What does the fact that 3 months after the Exodus, they're going to serve God on this mountain, they'll receive the Torah on this mountain, how does that answer the question? And I think the answer is like this. It's very profound. Moshe is judging the nation. And he's saying, they're not worthy. And God's answering, why are they not worthy? You're right, they're not worthy, 100%. But why not? What's going to be in 3 months? 3 months after the Exodus. They're going to get the Torah. Will they be worthy then? If a nation has the Almighty's holy Torah, will they be worthy then? Will that change their status? Will that change your evaluation? You bet it would. And therefore, Moshe, you have to envision them now, judge them now, judge their worthiness now, based upon how worthy they would be if they had everything that they needed to achieve merit. Moshe, you are correct in your assessment right now. Right now, they're not worthy. But Torah is the great perfecter of humanity. Torah is designed to teach someone who is a wild animal and turn him into an angel. It's the Almighty's prescription for achieving perfection. It's a way to teach someone who is living a life that's maybe undirected, that's not focused on what really matters. Without Torah, you don't have guidance, and therefore you're going to be dominated by your impulses. That's just the way it is. Without Torah, humanity is doomed. You don't have the anchor that's guiding you. You don't have the compass that's directing you. So you're right. Of course they're not meritorious, but why not? Because they don't have the Torah. But they will have the Torah eventually. And what will happen to them once they have the Torah? They'll become the kingdom of priests in the holy nation. So the only reason why they're not meritorious now is because they don't have what they need to become meritorious. Moshe, you have to envision them. How you have to judge them. How will they look if they get everything they need, if they're positioned to achieve great success? Will you question their worthiness after they receive the Torah? After they're transformed by the Son of Revelation? Then they'll be worthiness. They'll be worthy according to everyone. Even now, they must be viewed in that prism. I think there's another powerful lesson. We said that you have a child. You got to raise that child with the expectation that this child can be the Moshe of this generation. A Moshe on their level. And you have to create the environment that Moshe could come to life. The Moshe within them, the greatness within them. There's only one Moshe, but we have to do whatever we can to make sure that our children do not absorb things that will harm their candidacy to be a Moshe of their own. Here we see another idea. Without Torah, of course they're not meritorious. Without direction, of course they're not meritorious. And we don't view our charges as a finished product. Moshe, you're judging the people now, yes. But the way they are currently, you're accurate. But your mistake is to judge them the way they are now. Judge them the way they would be in 3 months from now. Judge them how they would look if they are given the great benefit of Torah. And this, of course, is a very powerful insight, I think, for parents, for educators, and for leaders of all types. What would someone look like if they have that environment and they're in that atmosphere that's designed to bring the best out of them? A, make sure they go into that environment. B, judge them, view them, see their greatness and their potential, what they would look like once they are immersed in that conducive environment. I think this is not only for children. This is an insight for ourselves as well. We're also on a path. If the Rambam tells us that every person could be like Moshe, I hate to say it, all of us could be like Moshe. Of course, not in absolute terms, but in relative terms. Moshe had his gargantuan potential, and he actualized his potential. Nothing can stop us from actualizing our potential. But we have to take steps to create the environment for that to flourish, for that to emerge. And we have to avoid the things that harm that from coming forth. We have to seek and pursue the things that actualize our potential. What is our sign of revelation? What are the things that we would need to make ourselves worthy of great things? The nation, you judge them when they're in Egypt, doesn't look very pretty. They're not worthy to excel. But what if we just change their environment? We've been to Mount Sinai. They have the Sinai experience. They have the Torah. Very, very quickly, they'll become worthy. Okay, well, let's bring them there. Let's bring them there, and let's see what they can make of themselves. Now, finally, I want to suggest another idea, final idea, to bring this point home. Also from the Parsha. We're reading about Moshe. He's the greatest who's ever lived. You read his whole story, and this is like the genesis of Moshe's story. And it's just a remarkable panoply of lessons for how Moshe himself made himself into the great person he became, but also lessons that we can deduce for our own journey, for our own path. Moshe was raised in Egypt. Well, he was in Egypt. Everyone was in Egypt, but he was in the house, in the belly of the beast, in the house of Pharaoh. He's adopted by Pharaoh's daughter, reared on the lap of one of our people's most heinous enemies. How does Moshe go from there to Sinai to lead the nation, to pull the people out of Egypt? It's a very fascinating story. Moshe comes of age. And he goes out. Why does he go out? To go witness the suffering of his brethren. Vayar b'savlosim, he sees their suffering. And he sees an Egyptian man striking a Hebrew man of his brethren. So what does he do? Well, we read the story. He strikes the Egyptian man and he buries him in the sand. That's what he does. But you read the verse very carefully, you find he does something else. There's one more thing that he does. Vayifan kol v'cho, he looks this way, looks that way. Vayar ki ein ish, he sees that there's no man. And then he strikes the Egyptian, and then he buries him in the sand. Now, if I read that verse and I had to explain what happened, I would say that Moshe was worried. Oh no, he's about to do a crime. He's going to do a crime. And when you do a crime, I understand, I gather, you don't want people to see it. Because if they see it, you could be arrested. So Moshe's trying to make sure there's no one watching. No cameras, like you look around, right? You want to do a shoplifting, you gotta look around quickly, make sure no one's watching. Slip it into your pocket, right? Right? Wrong. We don't shoplift. Okay. I had a friend of mine who told me that he was before he came to yeshiva, he used to shoplift. He would go to like J.C. Penney and put on 10 pairs of underwear and like pull off the tags, the anti-theft those things that blare when you leave. Anyhow, that's what Moshe's doing. He's looking, is anyone watching? Oh, no one's watching. I could do the crime. Now, there's a big problem with the story because the very next verse tells us that someone did see him. In fact, he was arrested and he was going to be killed. So what does it mean that Moshe turned to and fro and saw there's no man? Obviously, there was someone watching. Obviously. That's Rashi's question. How can we say like he looked, there's no one there? Oh, the coast is clear. I could commit the murder. Well, obviously it wasn't clear because he was arrested for it. So Rashi says something very different. Rashi says he looked this way, he looked that way. He wasn't looking to see if anyone was watching. Are there any bystanders? Are there any witnesses? He was looking into the soul of the Egyptian. And he was looking and examining the soul of the Egyptian. Will there ever be a convert that emerges from this Egyptian? And he saw there's no man. There's no man that exists within the soul of this Egyptian that will eventually convert. And therefore, if I kill the Egyptian now, we won't lose any converts. That's how Rashi interprets the verse. And therefore, it's okay to kill him. Moshe wasn't looking to see if there's any bystanders. He didn't care about the bystanders. He looked in the soul of the Egyptian. That's what Rashi tells us. And once he discovered there's no man, then he says, okay, I could kill the Egyptian. He does so. He buries him in the sand. That's Rashi's interpretation. I want to share another idea. Very powerful. Moshe was a conflicted man. Who were his parents? So we know his father was a Levite, his mother was a Levite. Not only that, his father is a grandson of Levi himself, great-grandson of Jacob. And his mother is a daughter of Levi, a granddaughter of Jacob. He comes from a very prestigious Jewish, Hebrew, Israelite family. So on one hand, his pedigree is very much skewed to being an Israelite. But his whole upbringing was entirely Egyptian. So Moshe has these dual identities. He's half Hebrew, he's half Egyptian. And he kind of lives at the intersection of those two realities. And the first thing the Torah tells us about Moshe is a time where he sees the Egyptian and the Hebrew fighting. And he looks to this way and he looks to that way. He looks to his one identity and he looks to the other identity. And he sees there's no man. He sees that this is not a way to live. You have to make a choice. Which one of those identities are you going to embrace? On one hand, you're half Jewish Israelite. On the other hand, you're half Egyptian. There's no man. You can't be both. You have to make a choice. So what does Moshe do? He struck the Egyptian and he buried him in the sand. Of course, on one level, it means he struck the actual Egyptian. But on this homiletic interpretation, he took the Egyptian that was within himself and he slayed that. He made a choice. Moshe made a choice to say, I am no longer half and half. He slayed the Egyptian within himself. I think this is a very powerful insight. All of us have dual identities within ourselves. The reason why is because we all know that we can have very high levels that we can aspire to. And whenever I say the word, we have potential to be the Moshe of our generation, it's like, oh, that's a scary thought. Because it's true. We all know it's true. We all know that we're capable of a lot more. We all know that. It's the reality of our existence. And we hope and we want and we yearn for higher things, for greater things. On the other hand, we all have an Egyptian within ourselves. It's interesting, the Hebrew word for Egypt is the same word for boundaries, limitations. There's a part of ourselves, within ourselves, that says, limitations! You're limited! Just be happy with what you have in your pursuit of greatness. It's good enough. Don't push yourself too much. There's a little Egyptian within you. There's a little Israelite, a little Egyptian. And Moshe, the first episode that we read about Moshe, is a choice. He says, I got these two people, these two futures for myself. A lot of people have those two futures endure for interminably. It never changes. You're always kind of conflicted. And maybe you make a little progress here, maybe you fall back a little bit there. Moshe is showing us how to do it. You look right, you look left. That's no man. That's a conflict. You slay the Egyptian, and you bury it in the sand. Egypt, the Rambam tells us, it's another word for evil inclination. The Hebrew word for Egypt, as we said, means constriction, limitation. They wanted to make sure that the Israelites work and work and work and work, and they're completely constricted. They have no room to think, and no room to breathe, and no room to maneuver. The idea of just going on a path and just staying on the path and never breaking out of that smallness. That's Egypt. Moshe had two identities within himself. We have two identities within himself. And Moshe said, this is not a way to live. You have to make a choice. And he slayed the Egyptian. The limitation, the constriction, the subsistence with mediocrity. He slayed it, and he buried it in the sand. I was thinking Moshe didn't just slay it, he also buried it in the sand. This force, this Egypt within ourselves, it wields a lot of power. We really like the idea of just taking it easy. It's those boundaries are very cozy. So Moshe is saying it's not enough to slay it, because if you slay, you see the Egyptian dead on the floor, and you hope maybe it could come back alive. Maybe, just maybe, it can be resurrected. No, Moshe's like, I'm going to slay it and bury it in the sand. I want to eliminate it entirely. I want to have a clean cut from Egypt. That was Moshe's path of how he ascended. All of us are urged to follow the lead of Moshe. We're all told, I'll say it again, each one of us can become like Moshe. We can achieve greatness. And therefore, each one of us has to make sure that we put ourselves in an environment where A, we won't have any bad influences. Let's not have any of that milk from impure sources. And B, we have to make sure that we have whatever we need to flourish. Don't judge ourselves the way we are now. We have a bright future for us in the future. Don't judge the Israelites the way they are now. Judge them as they would be if they are graced with the Almighty's Holy Torah. And what's the tactic? What's the means by which to do it? You look to the right. You look to the left. Look within yourself. And know there's an Israelite who wants to achieve great things within you. There's an Egyptian who wants to keep you limited and constricted. What to do? Emulate Moshe. Slay the Egyptian. It's not easy. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do. But this is the first step. Slay the Egyptian. And don't let it linger. Bury it in the sand. May we always be so fortunate as to slay the Egyptian, bury it in the sand, and achieve greatness akin to that of Moshe. My email address is rabbiwalby@gmail.com.